What if I told you that the most powerful thing you could put into your body today isn't sitting behind a pharmacy counter? It isn't in a capsule. It isn't in a green powder. It isn't in any subscription box being shipped to your door right now. What if it's been bubbling in a clay jar somewhere for the last 8,000 years? Most people don't know this. But while we are spending more money than ever before on gut health products, on probiotic supplements, on digestive enzymes, on fiber powders and prebiotic gummies, ancient civilizations were already healing themselves. Already rebuilding their bodies from the inside out. Already doing something that science is only now starting to fully understand. They were drinking fermented drinks. Not the kombucha you grab off a grocery shelf. Not the kefir in a plastic bottle. Real fermented drinks. Drinks made from raw ingredients, from water and grain and fruit and thyme. Drinks that Roman soldiers carried on long marches. Drinks that East African warriors relied on before battle. Drinks that Mongolian nomads trusted to keep them strong through brutal winters on the steppe. Drinks that Andean healers passed down through generations as medicine, as ritual, as food. And here is what makes this remarkable. Modern science is now catching up to what those people already knew. Researchers are publishing studies on the very same drinks these ancient cultures made. And what they are finding is not surprising to anyone who has read the history. Fermented drinks are packed with living bacteria that your gut desperately needs. They are loaded with enzymes your digestive system cannot produce on its own. They carry vitamins that are almost impossible to get anywhere else. They reduce inflammation. They support your immune system. They cross the gut-brain barrier and actually affect your mood, your focus, your sleep. These are not folk remedies. This is food science that is thousands of years old. Today I am going to show you 20 ancient fermented drinks from cultures all over the world. Drinks that rebuilt broken bodies, that sustained entire civilizations, that science is now proving were doing exactly what people always believed they were doing. You are going to recognize some of these. Others are going to surprise you. But by the end of this video, you are going to understand something that most people never figure out. Healing was never something that came from outside you. It was always something you drank, something you ate, something you made with your own hands and gave your body time to absorb. Let us start at the beginning. 1. Kvass, the drink that fed an empire. Before there was coffee, before there was tea, before there was anything you would recognize as a morning drink, there was kvass. This is one of the oldest fermented drinks in the world. It comes from Eastern Europe, from Russia, from the ancient Slavic world. And for thousands of years, it was not a specialty drink. It was not something you made for special occasions. It was what people drank every single day. Kvass is made from rye bread. Old rye bread, stale rye bread, bread that would otherwise be thrown away. You take that bread, you pour hot water over it, you let it cool, and then you let wild yeast and naturally occurring bacteria go to work on it. The fermentation process is short. Just a day or two. But in that time, something remarkable happens. The starches in the bread break down into sugars. The sugars feed the bacteria. The bacteria produce B vitamins, lactic acid, and enzymes that your gut recognizes as food. The alcohol content is so low it is almost nothing. But the probiotic content is genuinely significant. Russian peasants drank kvass because they had nothing else. But they also lived in a world before antibiotics, before hospitals, before any of the things we take for granted. And they survived. They worked brutal agricultural lives on almost nothing. And kvass was part of why. Modern analysis of traditionally made kvass has found strains of lactobacillus that are directly associated with reduced gut inflammation. It is high in B vitamins, particularly B1 and B2. It supports digestion. It alkalizes the body after a heavy meal. And it costs almost nothing to make. 2. Kefir, the drink the Caucasus Mountains kept secret for centuries. There is a legend in the Caucasus Mountains that says the Prophet Muhammad himself gave kefir grains to the people of that region and told them to guard the secret carefully. Whether or not you believe the legend, the history is real. Kefir has been made in the Caucasus for at least 2,000 years. Possibly much longer. The people of that region were known for their extraordinary lifespans, for their physical strength, for their resistance to illness. And for centuries, outsiders wondered what they were doing differently. The answer, in large part, was kefir. Kefir is made by adding a culture of bacteria and yeast to fresh milk. The culture is called a kefir grain, and it looks like a small, rubbery cauliflower. It ferments the milk over about 24 hours. What you get at the end is a tangy, slightly fizzy drink that is thicker than water and thinner than yogurt. What makes kefir different from almost every other fermented food on this list is the sheer diversity of the bacteria it contains. A single serving of traditionally made kefir can contain more than 30 different strains of beneficial bacteria. 30. Most commercial probiotic supplements contain 3 or 4. Research has shown that kefir can reduce symptoms of lactose intolerance, because the bacteria predigest the lactose for you. It has been shown to reduce markers of systemic inflammation. Studies have linked regular kefir consumption to improved bone density, better immune response, and even reduced anxiety through the gut-brain axis. The people of the Caucasus were not guessing. They were right. 3. Kombucha, the tea that crossed continents. Most people think of kombucha as a modern health drink. Something that appeared in health food stores in the last 20 years. But kombucha is over 2,000 years old. The earliest records trace kombucha to ancient China, around 220 BCE, during the Qin dynasty. It was called the tea of immortality. Not because people were naive. But because they had watched what happened to people who drank it regularly over a lifetime. From China, kombucha spread to Japan, to Russia, to Eastern Europe. Everywhere it traveled, the same story followed. People who drank it regularly seemed healthier. They seemed to age more slowly. They had better digestion. They had more energy. Kombucha is made by adding a SCOBY, a symbiotic culture of bacteria and yeast, to sweeten tea. The SCOBY ferments the tea over 7 to 14 days. During that time, it produces organic acids, B vitamins, enzymes, and a wide range of beneficial bacteria. The sugar that was added at the beginning is almost entirely consumed by the fermentation process. What is left is a drink that is rich in acetic acid, glucuronic acid, and multiple strains of probiotics. Research has shown that kombucha supports liver function, improves gut microbiome diversity, and provides antioxidant compounds that fight free radical damage in the body. 2,000 years of traditional use. And science is confirming almost all of it. 4. Boza, the ancient drink of the Ottoman Empire. Walk through Istanbul in the winter and you will still hear the boza sellers calling from the streets. They carry it in large metal containers on their backs, pouring it into glasses for people on their way home in the cold. This is a tradition that is over 1,000 years old. Boza is a fermented grain drink. It is made from fermented wheat or millet, and it has the consistency of a thin porridge. It is slightly sweet, slightly sour, and very slightly alcoholic. Just enough to know it has been through fermentation. Not enough to impair anything. Ottoman soldiers carried boza on campaigns. Travelers drank it on the road. It was sold in dedicated boza shops called bozahaneler. It was considered a health drink long before the word probiotic existed. What boza contains is a rich supply of lactic acid bacteria, along with thiamine, B vitamins, and a genuinely significant amount of prebiotic fiber that comes from the grain. The fermentation process partially breaks down the gluten in the wheat, making it easier to digest than regular bread. It fills you up, it warms you, and it rebuilds the gut at the same time. In winter, when fresh vegetables were almost impossible to find, boza was one of the few sources of live bacteria and vitamins that the Ottoman population had access to. And they knew it. They relied on it the way we rely on vitamin supplements today. 5. Pulque, the sacred drink of ancient Mexico. Long before tequila. Long before mezcal. Before any of the distilled spirits that Mexico is known for today. There was pulque. Pulque is one of the oldest fermented drinks in the Americas. It dates back at least 2,000 years, possibly much longer. The Aztecs considered it sacred. Only priests and elders were allowed to drink it freely. For everyone else, it was reserved for festivals and for the sick. They called it the drink of the gods. And when you understand what it actually does to the human body, that starts to make a different kind of sense. Pulque is made from the sap of the agave plant. The sap, called aguamiel, which means honey water, is collected fresh from the heart of the plant. It is rich in natural sugars, in minerals, in vitamin C. When you allow wild yeast and bacteria to ferment that sap, what you get after just a few days is a thick, slightly viscous, mildly alcoholic drink packed with live bacteria and bioavailable nutrients. Analysis of traditionally made pulque has found a remarkable diversity of probiotic strains, including multiple species of Leuconostoc, Lactobacillus, and Saccharomyces. It is also high in iron, in vitamin C, and in fructooligosaccharides, which are among the most powerful prebiotic compounds known to science. The Aztecs gave pulque to women recovering from childbirth. They gave it to the sick. They gave it to the elderly. Not as a ritual gesture. As a practical medicine. They knew something. And now we know it too. 6. Ginger beer, the Caribbean healer. This is not the ginger beer you buy in a can. That is something else entirely. Real fermented ginger beer, the kind made with a ginger bug, which is a live culture of wild yeast and bacteria fed on fresh ginger and sugar, has been made in the Caribbean and in parts of Africa and Britain for hundreds of years. Ginger itself has one of the most well-documented medicinal profiles of any plant on Earth. It is anti-inflammatory. It settles nausea. It reduces pain. It supports digestion. It has been used as medicine in India, China, and West Africa for thousands of years. When you ferment ginger, something interesting happens. The fermentation process breaks down certain compounds in the ginger root and makes them more bioavailable. It also adds a living community of beneficial bacteria and wild yeast to the anti-inflammatory compounds already present in the ginger. The result is a drink that hits your gut from multiple directions at once. The probiotics rebuild the microbiome. The prebiotic compounds in the ginger feed the good bacteria that are already there. The anti-inflammatory gingerols reduce gut inflammation that was making everything else worse. Caribbean communities made ginger beer as a home remedy for stomach ailments, for nausea during pregnancy, for cold and flu symptoms, for general weakness and fatigue. It was cheap, it was easy to make, and it worked. It still works. Because the science behind why it works has not changed. 7. Tibicos, the water kefir the world forgot. Most people know about milk kefir. Far fewer people know about tibicos. Which is a shame, because tibicos might be one of the most accessible fermented drinks ever discovered. Tibicos are water kefir grains. They are small, translucent, slightly gelatinous clusters of bacteria and yeast that live in sugar water rather than milk. You feed them sugar and water, add a little bit of fruit or fruit juice for nutrients, and within 24 to 48 hours you have a naturally carbonated, probiotic-rich drink that requires no dairy and costs almost nothing. The origins of tibicos are not entirely clear. Some researchers believe they originated in Mexico, where they were found fermenting on the pads of the prickly pear cactus. Others trace similar cultures to the traditional fermented drinks of Tibet and parts of Central Asia. What is clear is that cultures all over the world independently discovered these small grains and understood their value. They were used as medicine. They were traded. They were passed between households the way recipes were passed, with care and with knowledge of what they were for. Tibicos water kefir contains multiple strains of lactobacillus and bifidobacterium, along with wild yeast strains that support digestive function. Because they are dairy-free, they are accessible to people who cannot tolerate milk. And because the base is just water and sugar, they can be flavored with anything: ginger, lemon, berries, hibiscus, making them one of the most adaptable probiotic drinks ever made. 8. Tagwa, the fermented porridge drink of East Africa. In Tanzania, in Uganda, in parts of Kenya and Mozambique, there is a drink called tagwa. It has been made for centuries. It is drunk every day by millions of people. And almost no one outside of East Africa has heard of it. Tagwa is a thin, fermented porridge drink made from millet, sorghum, or maize. The grain is soaked, allowed to germinate, dried, ground, and then fermented with wild bacteria over 1 to 2 days. What you get is a slightly sour, slightly tangy, thin drink that is both food and medicine. In East African communities, tagwa is given to children who are sick. It is given to women during and after pregnancy. It is drunk by workers before long days in the fields. It is considered strengthening in a way that goes beyond simple calories. And the science backs that up. The fermentation and germination process in tagwa does something remarkable to the grain it starts with. It dramatically increases the bioavailability of the minerals in the grain, particularly iron and zinc, which are often locked behind phytic acid in unfermented grains. It increases the vitamin content. It introduces lactic acid bacteria that are directly associated with improved gut health in children, including reduced rates of diarrheal disease. In communities where clean water and diverse food sources are scarce, tagwa has historically been one of the most important things keeping people alive and healthy. It is not a superfood trend. It is survival knowledge that is thousands of years old. 9. Chicha, the sacred drink of the Inca. The Inca built one of the most sophisticated civilizations in human history. They engineered roads through the Andes. They built cities at 14,000 feet. They managed an empire of 12 million people without money, without writing as we know it, and without the wheel. And at the center of their culture, their economy, and their medicine, there was chicha. Chicha is a fermented drink made from maize. The most traditional version is made by chewing cooked maize and then spitting it into a vessel of water. The enzymes in human saliva begin the fermentation process. Over several days, wild yeast and bacteria take over and finish the job. The Inca drank chicha at every important occasion. It was offered to the sun god Inti. It was given to warriors before battle. It was distributed to laborers on state projects as part of their compensation. There were dedicated chicha brewers, called aklas, who were considered among the most important workers in the empire. Chicha is rich in lactic acid bacteria, in B vitamins, and in enzymes that support digestion and immune function. The fermentation process also makes the nutrients in the maize significantly more accessible than they would be in unfermented corn. For a people living at extreme altitude, doing extreme physical labor, on a diet that was largely grain and potato, chicha was not a luxury. It was a nutritional foundation. 10. Whey drink, the forgotten elixir of the Alps. Long before anyone invented protein powder, dairy farmers in Switzerland, Austria, and across the alpine regions of Europe were drinking whey. Whey is the liquid that separates from the curds when you make cheese. For a long time, it was considered a waste product. Something to throw away or feed to pigs. But dairy cultures figured out very quickly that whey was something else entirely. Something valuable. Something healing. Whey that comes from the production of raw, traditionally fermented cheese is packed with bioactive proteins, with immunoglobulins, with lactoferrin, and with the beneficial bacteria that were present throughout the cheese-making process. It is also rich in glutathione precursors, which are among the most important compounds your body uses to fight oxidative stress. In the Alps, whey drinking was formalized into actual health retreats. People traveled from across Europe to spend weeks in the mountains doing nothing but drinking fresh whey and breathing mountain air. These retreats were called mokuren, whey cures. And they were taken seriously as medicine by the physicians of the time. The Roman physician Galen wrote about the healing properties of whey. Hippocrates recommended it. Across the ancient Mediterranean world, whey was understood to be something that healed the gut, cleared the skin, and strengthened the body. It costs nothing to make if you make cheese. And the science of what it contains is finally being studied at the level of detail it always deserved. 11. Amazake, the Japanese drink of gentle healing. In Japan, there is a drink that has been made for over 1,000 years. It is called amazake, which translates roughly as sweet sake. But it is not sake in the way most people think of sake. It is something much gentler, much more healing, and traditionally, much more important. Amazake is made by fermenting rice with a mold called koji, which is Aspergillus oryzae. The koji breaks down the starches in the rice into simple sugars, creating a naturally sweet drink with almost no alcohol. What it also creates is a remarkable concentration of B vitamins, digestive enzymes, amino acids, and live beneficial microorganisms. In traditional Japanese culture, amazake was the drink you gave to people who were sick, to people who were recovering from illness, to pregnant women, to children who needed gentle nourishment, to elderly people whose digestion had become fragile. It was considered a form of medicine so basic and so obvious that it needed no explanation. Of course you drank amazake when you were sick. Of course you gave it to someone who was healing. That was what it was for. Modern analysis confirms what Japanese tradition always said. Amazake is rich in resistant starch that feeds good bacteria in the lower gut. It is high in ferulic acid, a potent antioxidant. It contains naturally occurring beta-glucans that stimulate the immune system. And it is gentle enough that even people with severely compromised digestion can absorb it easily. 12. Mabi, the Caribbean bark drink. This one surprises almost everyone who hears it for the first time. In Barbados, in Trinidad, in the Eastern Caribbean, there is a traditional fermented drink made from the bark of the mabi tree. The bark is boiled with spices, anise, cinnamon, citrus peel, bay leaves, and then the liquid is fermented for several days until it develops a characteristic flavor that is bitter at first, sweet in the finish, and unlike anything else on earth. Mabi has been made in the Caribbean for centuries. It is one of those drinks that people who grew up with it associate deeply with home, with grandmothers, with front porches and slow afternoons. But it was also always understood as medicine. In Caribbean folk medicine, mabi is used to reduce blood pressure, to lower blood sugar, to cool the body in the heat. The bark of the mabi tree contains colubrine, a compound that has been shown in research to have hypoglycemic effects, meaning it genuinely supports blood sugar regulation. The fermentation process adds a community of beneficial bacteria to those already present compounds. The combination of the medicinal bark and the live bacteria from fermentation creates a drink that works on multiple systems at once. Which is exactly what the people who have been making it for generations always said it did. 13. Hardali, the ancient Turkish grape drink. In the Thrace region of Turkey, near the border with Greece and Bulgaria, there is a drink called hardali that goes back thousands of years. Hardali is made from red grapes that are pressed and then fermented with crushed mustard seeds and cherry leaves. The mustard seeds create a natural antibacterial environment that suppresses alcohol-producing yeast while allowing lactic acid bacteria to dominate the fermentation. The result is a drink with almost no alcohol and a very high concentration of beneficial bacteria. Red grapes are already one of the most antioxidant-rich foods on the planet. They are loaded with polyphenol, with resveratrol, with anthocyanins that have been shown in research to reduce inflammation, protect heart tissue, and fight oxidative stress. When you ferment those grapes with lactic acid bacteria, the bacteria break down the grape compounds in ways that make them more bioavailable. They increase the amount of free polyphenol. They generate new bioactive compounds that were not present in the unfermented grape. The people of Thrace were making one of the most sophisticated anti-inflammatory drinks ever created. Without a laboratory. Without a nutritionist. Just with the knowledge that had been passed down from one generation to the next for thousands of years. 14. Mahu, the fermented maize drink of southern Africa. In Zimbabwe, in South Africa, in Botswana and Mozambique, mahul has been drunk for centuries. It is a fermented porridge drink made from white maize. The maize is soaked, fermented with wild bacteria for several days, and then thinned with water to a drinkable consistency. It is slightly sour, slightly creamy, and deeply filling. Mahul was the traditional drink of farm workers, of miners, of people doing heavy physical labor in the harsh southern African sun. It was carried to the fields in large containers. Drunk throughout the day. Shared among workers. It was chosen for those situations not because it was the only option, but because people knew it gave something that water alone did not give. It sustained energy. It reduced fatigue. It kept the gut working under physical stress. The fermentation process in mahul increases the bioavailability of the amino acids in the maize protein. It reduces the phytic acid content, freeing up iron, zinc, and calcium for absorption. It introduces lactic acid bacteria that protect the gut lining under conditions of physical stress. And the natural sourness of the lactic acid fermentation is mild enough to be drunk in large quantities throughout the day. Research on mahul has confirmed what Southern African communities always practiced. It is not just a thirst quencher. It is a nutritional supplement in drink form. 15. Congee, the Indian fermented carrot drink. Most of the drinks on this list come from grain or fruit or milk. Congee is different. Congee is a traditional North Indian drink made from black carrots, a variety of carrot that is deep purple-red in color and packed with anthocyanins. The carrots are fermented with water, mustard seeds, and salt over 5 to 7 days. The result is a sour, tangy, vibrant pink drink that is traditionally made in clay pots during the winter months. In North India, congee is a seasonal drink associated with the festival of Holi. But its traditional use goes far beyond celebration. It was made because winter was when people needed it most. When cold temperatures made digestion sluggish. When the gut microbiome needed the most support. When fermented foods and drinks were most clearly understood to be medicine. Black carrots are extraordinarily high in anthocyanins, the same compounds responsible for the health benefits of blueberries, elderberries, and purple cabbage. Anthocyanins have been shown in research to reduce inflammation, to protect the cardiovascular system, and to have significant prebiotic effects, feeding beneficial bacteria in the lower gut. When you ferment black carrots, the mustard seeds add their own antimicrobial compounds, which shape which bacteria dominate the fermentation. The lactic acid bacteria that thrive in that environment produce additional bioactive compounds. The entire drink becomes greater than the sum of its parts. It is inexpensive. It is seasonal. And it is one of the most elegant examples of ancient nutritional wisdom in any culture in the world. 16. Suti Tsai, Mongolian fermented milk tea. The Mongolian steppe is one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Winters reach temperatures that kill exposed skin in minutes. The diet of traditional nomadic Mongolians was almost entirely animal-based. Meat, fat, and dairy. There were almost no vegetables. Almost no fruit. Almost no fresh produce of any kind for months at a time. And yet the Mongol warriors who rode out of that steppe under Genghis Khan were legendary for their physical endurance, their immunity to illness, and their ability to survive conditions that would kill almost anyone else. Part of their survival system was suti tsai. Fermented milk tea. Suti tsai is made by brewing black tea and then adding fermented horse milk, called arag, along with salt and sometimes animal fat. The combination of the tea's polyphenol, the living bacteria in the fermented milk, and the fat that allows fat-soluble vitamins to be absorbed created a drink that hit almost every nutritional need a person living on the steppe had. Arag itself is one of the most probiotic-rich foods ever studied. Fermented mare's milk contains dozens of strains of beneficial bacteria, along with B vitamins, vitamin C, and a protein profile that is distinct from cow's milk. It was the primary source of vitamin C for many nomadic populations who had no access to fresh vegetables. On the steppe, it was not a drink. It was life. 17. Ginger kvass, Russia's forgotten gut healer. We talked about basic kvass earlier. But Russia also has a long tradition of flavored kvass, and one of the most interesting versions combines the fermented bread base of traditional kvass with fresh ginger root. Ginger kvass was made in Russian homes and sold by street vendors for centuries. It combined the lactic acid bacteria and B vitamins of the kvass fermentation with the anti-inflammatory and digestive supporting compounds of fresh ginger. What made ginger kvass particularly interesting from a nutritional standpoint is the way the fermentation interacts with the compounds in the ginger root. Some of the most potent anti-inflammatory compounds in ginger are not easily absorbed on their own. But the lactic acid fermentation process begins to break down the cell walls of the ginger, releasing those compounds and making them significantly more bioavailable. Russian peasants drank ginger kvass in the summer to stay cool and support digestion. They drank it in the winter to warm from the inside and fight illness. It was considered one of the most basic forms of home medicine available to anyone, regardless of income. The ingredients were a piece of old rye bread and a knob of ginger. The cost was almost nothing. The benefit was real enough that it survived centuries of use. 18. Beetroot kvass, the blood builder of Eastern Europe. Still in the tradition of kvass, but this one is worth its own entry because the science behind it is remarkable. Beetroot kvass is made by fermenting raw beets in water with a small amount of salt and sometimes a starter culture of whey or previous kvass. The beets ferment over 3 to 7 days. What you get is a deep, dark red liquid that is earthy, slightly sour, and genuinely striking in its effects on the body. Raw beets are already extraordinary. They are one of the richest sources of dietary nitrates on the planet. Nitrates convert in the body to nitric oxide, which dilates blood vessels, reduces blood pressure, increases oxygen delivery to muscles, and significantly improves exercise performance. Research on beet juice has shown improvements in endurance performance that rival some pharmaceutical interventions. When you ferment those beets, the lactic acid bacteria increase the bioavailability of the betalains, the compounds that give beets their color and that have powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant effects. They also produce folate during the fermentation process. In Eastern European tradition, beetroot kvass was drunk to build blood, to support the heart, and to recover from illness. Women drank it after childbirth. Men drank it after heavy labor. The elderly drank it to keep their blood moving. Every one of those traditional uses maps to something we now understand biochemically. The people making this drink were right about all of it. 19. Tepache, the Mexican pineapple ferment. In Mexico, when you finish eating a pineapple, you do not throw away the core and the skin. You make tepache. Tepache is a traditional Mexican fermented drink made from pineapple peel and core, fermented with piloncillo, unrefined cane sugar, water, and spices like cinnamon and cloves. The fermentation happens quickly, over just 2 to 3 days, driven by the wild yeast and bacteria that live naturally on the surface of the pineapple skin. What you get is a lightly fizzy, sweet-sour, golden drink that is refreshing in a way that is hard to describe unless you have tasted it. And it has been made in Mexico for centuries. Pineapple contains bromelain, one of the most powerful natural anti-inflammatory enzymes known to science. Bromelain breaks down proteins in the gut, reduces systemic inflammation, and has been used in clinical settings to reduce swelling and accelerate healing after surgery. During the fermentation of tepache, the bacteria and yeast interact with the bromelain and the polyphenol in the pineapple skin in ways that increase their concentration and bioavailability. The spices, cinnamon and cloves, add their own antimicrobial and anti-inflammatory compounds to the mix. The result is a drink that has real anti-inflammatory, probiotic, and enzyme-rich properties. Made from what would otherwise be kitchen waste. Made by people who knew, generation after generation, that the skin of the pineapple was not the part to throw away. 20. Atole agrio, the fermented corn drink of ancient Mesoamerica. We end where some of the oldest food cultures in the Americas began. Atole agrio, sour atole, is a traditional fermented corn drink that has been made in Mexico and Central America for thousands of years. It is different from chicha in how it is made and what it becomes. Where chicha is generally drunk as a thin liquid, atol agrio is thicker. More like a drink than a porridge, but more substantial than water. Dried maize is soaked for several days until it begins to sour naturally. Then it is ground, mixed with water, and lightly cooked into a thin, slightly sour, warm drink. In some regions, the souring process alone is the fermentation. In others, a culture of bacteria from a previous batch is added to speed and direct the fermentation. In ancient Mesoamerican cultures, atol was the drink of daily life. Every morning. Every evening. For thousands of years, across cultures that rose and fell and rose again, atol was the constant. The fermentation of the corn in atol agrio does something nutritionally profound. It increases the availability of niacin, vitamin B3, from the maize. This is critically important. Unfermented maize does not release its niacin in a form the human body can absorb. That is why populations who ate unfermented corn as their primary food developed pellagra, the devastating niacin deficiency disease. Mesoamerican cultures never developed pellagra. Because they fermented and processed their corn in ways that unlocked the niacin. They understood this not as chemistry, but as thousands of years of observation. If you eat the corn this way, people are healthy. If you eat it another way, they are not. They were right. As they always were. What all 20 of these drinks have in common. Here is what I want you to notice. These drinks come from every corner of the planet. From the Mongolian steppe to the Mexican highlands. From the Russian countryside to the Caribbean coast. From the Japanese kitchen to the East African plains. They were made by people who had no communication with each other. No shared scientific tradition. No research papers or peer-reviewed journals. And yet every single one of them arrived at the same fundamental truth. Fermented foods and drinks heal the gut. A healthy gut heals everything else. These civilizations knew it because they watched it happen. Generation after generation. Century after century. They kept the recipes. They passed the cultures. They taught their children the way the people who taught them had taught them. And now we have the science to explain exactly why those traditions were right. Your gut contains somewhere between 30 and 40 trillion bacteria. More bacterial cells than human cells. That community of bacteria, your microbiome, controls more of your health than most people realize. It regulates your immune system. It produces vitamins your body cannot produce on its own. It communicates directly with your brain through the vagus nerve. It determines how much inflammation you carry. How well you sleep. How clearly you think. How stable your mood is. When that community is damaged, and it is damaged by antibiotics, by processed food, by chronic stress, by everything the modern world throws at it, the effects ripple out through every system in your body. Fermented drinks are one of the most direct ways human beings have ever found to rebuild that community. Not because of a clinical trial. Because of 10,000 years of watching people who drank these things live longer, get sick less often, work harder, heal faster, and age more gracefully than people who did not. Where to start? You do not need all 20 of these. You do not need to travel to another country or order specialty ingredients online. Start with what you can find. If you have access to milk, make kefir. Buy a starter culture online for a few dollars, put it in a jar of whole milk, leave it on your counter for 24 hours, and start drinking it every day. If you do not do dairy, make water kefir with tibiko's grains, or brew kombucha with a SCOBY and some tea and sugar. If you want something simpler, make beetroot kvass. Chop some raw beets. Put them in a jar with salted water. Leave it for 5 days. Drink a small glass every morning. The investment is minimal. The ingredients are simple. The knowledge, as you now know, is ancient. Your gut has been waiting for this a long time. Your ancestors would not understand why you ever stopped. Start drinking alive again. Kindly like and subscribe.